Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we will be taking a look at three important stories and developments around the world. Our first story is with reference to what has been going on in India and has been called bulldozer politics, and something that has been happening a lot under the garb of anti-encroachment drives, something that has met with a lot of protests, also opposition from Congress and other opposition parties. And now we also know that protests have erupted in Shaheen Bagh on Monday with hundreds of people, also including women who've been protesting against these drives, which are violating people's spaces and their houses. This is also affecting the Muslim population at large, because these anti-encroachment drives continue to discriminate against Muslim population. And this is something that has been going on for a while now. And with reference to the involvement of state institutions, this is something, of course, that needs particular attention. There have been, of course, denials of any relevance with these anti-encroachment drives to religion by the ruling party. However, we know that time and again this is something that has targeted the Muslim population, something we will be talking about in further detail in our show today. Our second segment is going to focus on the United States statement, which has come from the US State Department, who has said that the issue with regards to what has been spoken about by the previous government and the former Prime Minister as a conspiracy that was started or initiated by the US with reference to government change in Pakistan is false, something that the US has repeatedly denied, and that this will not have an impact on the bilateral relationship with Pakistan moving forward. The leadership have also talked about how Pakistan's relationship is important to the US in lots of mutual areas, with people-to-people contacts and other areas of trade as well, which is, of course, what is going to be the focus moving forward as well. They also emphasized on the educational programs and exchanges of people of both the countries, and said that that has been going on and will continue despite the developments of the previous government. We're going to talk in further detail the kind of impact that it's going to have and whether or not we can move forward with the relationship intact. At the end, we will also be taking a look at the economic situation within the country, something that we have talked about just 2 days ago as well. And now we also see there's another dip in the Pakistan Stock Exchange. And this means that we are faced with increasing economic burden in the face of uncertainty by the government not being able to currently make a decision, particularly with reference to the IMF program, and also their decision on fuel subsidies, which are becoming increasingly a problem for the government to be able to sustain. We've seen that the dollar has also reached its all-time high of 190 against the rupee, and this is something that is obviously of concern to the government as well. Whether or not we can see a quick and urgent action with regards to the IMF program and fuel subsidies is something that we're going to be talking about, and how soon can the government be actually able to come up with a decision that can change the course, the direction that the economy is currently going in. These are going to be our focus today in our segment, and for this we'll be joined by a guest online. But as usual in our studios, I've been joined by Farrukh Pitafi and Faisal. And for our first segment, the first and second segment, we're going to be also talking to Dr. Jameel Ahmed, who's a former ambassador, and Tom O'Connor, who's a senior journalist, and have joined us both online. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us today. Let's talk about India first. When we look at the situation that has been going on for a while, Dr. Jameel, I'll start with you. This is something that we have been talking about for a while. When the BJP keeps denying the fact that these anti-encroachment drives have nothing to do with religion. But then again, we know that on ground there are so many actions that have been taken deliberately targeting the Muslim population. And these bulldozer politics seem to be now the new thing on the streets as well. And it's affecting the population at large, and are quite gross at what they actually are able to accomplish. How is it that these protests by the population and by the Congress or other opposition parties are not being met with the kind of support that is required, perhaps within India and outside of India as well?
India has to be seen in the backdrop of the fact that Modi India is altogether different. And Modi India has brought in so many legislations, which is nothing but to marginalize the minorities. And minorities, that has been reported, amply reported in the US report for the religious intolerance and the international report for the religious freedom. And there they have covered all these points of the Muslims or the other minorities are being marginalized, may it be Citizens Act, may it be the Register for the Citizens, may it be the acts which they have brought, the legislation which they have brought, including 370 and the 35A in Kashmir. All these things, if we view it in totality, we find that the Modi government has altogether different agenda, and that agenda is the one which has been dilated upon, which has been spelled out for the last several decades by RSS. So if we understand that point, then we can now discuss about Shaheen Bagh and about what happened in Delhi Shaheen Bagh. Here they got the resistance because Aadmi Party legislator, he just stood against those bulldozers, and he gave them the legal ground, because the pretext was that the Supreme Court has rejected the appeal of the citizens who were supposedly made some encroachments. But the legislator there, Aadmi Party, he stood in front of those resistance and the bulldozer, and he told them that there is no encroachment whatsoever, which could be violation of the Supreme Court rejection of the application. In fact, what has
Right,
happened
but
is that
Dr. Jamil, if it's quite simply understood that there is no legal ground for these anti-encroachment drives, how come that they continue to happen? It has happened before. It's still happening. I understand the sentiment of somebody standing in front of the bulldozer, but they shouldn't be there in the first place.
no, they shouldn't have been there, but this is what, if we track the record of Modi government, the BJP government, they find some pretext or the other to marginalize the minorities. And this is one in that context. They should not have been there, but this was Delhi, and this was Shaheen Bagh, and there they had a very strong legislature. There, people come in the immediately took recourse to the social media. Think about those remote areas of the India where people don't have access as much as they have it in Delhi, and therefore it's happening every hour and every day in India in some shape or the other. May it be encroachment, may it be marginalization in any other shape, may it be harassment, you name any, and may it be at the police station, may it be at the government offices. So all at all those places, it's happening, and it's so happened that these kind of, particularly Shaheen Bagh type of incidents, it is highlighted and flagged. That's why it comes to the notice in this manner. The BBC is reporting, and the other important channels are reporting. But think about the streets and those small precincts and those small villages where
All right.
people are being marginalized every
All
day.
right, Farrukh, can
So
we actually look towards the Supreme Court in India or the courts in general to actually be able to solve the issue or be able to withstand what's going on?
Right, Sana, today is an important day regarding this question, because today the Indian Supreme Court seems to have, woken up, and it has suspended the sedition law. But I think that they are 8 years late. I tell you, there are two things that you have to remember, and kindly bear in mind the colonial tradition. When there were colonial governments in South Asia, there used to be a principle that whosoever was deemed anti-state or who was not that much supportive of the colonial agenda, the houses were demolished. At this moment, this is exactly what seems to be the case, and there seems to be a vendetta playing out. Particularly, if you remember, when CAA was actually being protested against, at that time Shaheen Bagh had become a huge symbol of protest or pushback, and that's why we see this kind of bulldozing that is going on. There is a reason why Indian institutions should be reeling against what is happening, and there is some incremental approach here. For example, for ages, BJP kept on saying that Congress allows Muslim vote to blackmail them, right? So they came up with the idea that representation, protection without representation, that we are going to protect your reservations, your rights, but we are not going to give you any kind of representation in the parliament or in the government. And that was continuing for a bit, but now incrementally they have started using the next stage, and that is bulldozing their houses, killing or attacking them, and this continues. And that actually reminds you of Nazi Germany, because at this moment the source code seems to be the same. One, Indian society is stratified. It believes that some human beings are better than others. They are Brahmins, they are Kshatris and others. And then they are also inspired by various Nazi thinkers, right? And it is documented fact. So at this moment, I think everyone in India who believes in secularism and institutionalism should be worried, because at this moment it seems that they are taking the country in that direction.
Right. Tom, when we talk about how this needs to be perceived perhaps in India by the saner voices, what about the rest of the world? How are you looking at the situation? Is this something that when you see happening, it does not warrant a response on perhaps a global scale? This and the numerous measures of discrimination and violations that exist currently in India?
Well, if I start with the United States, I think that it's quite clear that the U.S. Looks at its relations in terms of strategy. So while we might see, if things continue to escalate, a statement or two on the situation, I don't think it will stand up to as much scrutiny, given the fact that India is viewed as a very strategic partner of the United States right now, especially as the U.S. looks further to maximize its interests in the Asia-Pacific region, the Indo-Pacific as they call it, to include India in that. So I don't expect to see a major backlash to the United States. Now, for the rest of the world, I think it depends also on their relationship with India. I think that's how foreign countries in general tend to view their views when it comes to the domestic politics of India or any other country for that matter. It's very transactional.
Right, Tom, sorry to cut you, but very quickly, Tom, I hope you can hear me. Very quickly, you were saying that the US sees India as a strategic partner. What is the foundation of that strategic partnership, sir?
I would say largely because I think that the U.S. and India have found common ground in challenging China, number one, and I think number two also there's just
not
an
democracy
relationship in the defense sphere.
Not democracy. I thought both countries call themselves democracies. That's why they can align rather than aligning with China. Is it not true?
I think that's certainly a big part of it, yes. I think that they share a more similar worldview than the U.S. and China do.
And democracy seems to be under threat in India at this moment?
Yeah, I think certainly that there is, we've been doing a lot of reporting lately on this concept of democracies and autocracies in the world, and India sometimes finds itself somewhere in the middle, especially under the Modi administration. I think that some of those freedoms and some of those what make the aspects that make up a democracy have been somewhat eroded in favor of a more nationalistic state, and that's something that I think that Prime Minister Modi has sought to really enhance in his messaging when it comes to his electorate, his platform to stay in power.
Tom, do you think that in coming future, of course, America that has always been considered as a champion of democracy, of course, and then of course, if we talk about freedom of press, freedom of speech, it has actually championed. US is a champion of everything, So right now, if you look at the situation in India, it is apparent, and of course it is understandable as well, that strategically India has aligned itself with America, and both of the countries, they expect certain things from each other. So in this context, should we be expecting that India expects from America to keep an eye shut when it comes to India dealing with its minorities, dealing with its neighbors, and dealing with its own people? I mean, if we talk about Dalits, they are not a minority, they are Hindus, but still they are low caste, and it's a humanitarian crisis for them as well. So should we say that it's a new America under the Democrats, the democracy of America is quite new?
So deliberately eyes wide shut.
Yeah, I think that certainly. I think India would react very strongly if the U.S. were to sort of really scrutinize the policies going on there. As I said, you might see some statements, and they might be tucked away in some State Department reports on religious persecution. But when it comes to actual bilateral policies between these two countries, it doesn't seem to be having any effect. What's going on in
Right.
India right now, nor do I think we should expect that. And I think that there is sort of a tacit understanding there from both sides that that's something that will not be discussed. I think that certainly the U.S. sees itself as a beacon of democracy, perhaps, but that title is somewhat outdated, even if some I think leaders still tout it today, because very much we've seen the U.S. Align with countries much less democratic than India across the world, including in the Middle East. And I think it's understood in most foreign policy circles that the U.S., for the sake of strategy and advancing its interests, will have to deal with countries that it does not agree with in terms of governance
Right.
or
Tom,
democracy.
can you also help me understand perhaps the limitations or the level to which we can still see the U.S. supporting perhaps countries who are not as democratically aligned, or even if we just talk about India for that matter, how far can we actually see the support being extended despite however much the situation keeps deteriorating or violations keep on existing? Would you be able to give us a general idea of how bad the situation has to be before we can perhaps see more than just statements?
Yeah, I think that one thing, it would certainly have to affect, I would have to have a domestic element too in the U.S. here. I think that there would have to be a broad outrage here in the United States regarding the issue, beyond just perhaps people who are in foreign policy circles or perhaps people who are connected to the issue on a personal level. And we haven't seen that yet because, of course, I think a lot of this has to do with the U.S.'s own nature as a democracy. So a lot of foreign policy, we know, is based in domestic politics. And for instance, when we see things happening in Russia and Ukraine, there is an outrage here, so the U.S. will answer that. Now, sometimes the U.S. leads on things, so it's not to say that the U.S. doesn't also, when it comes to the State Department, take advanced measures beyond that. But when it comes to something as important and high level as India, I don't expect to see any major movement come first from leaders and U.S. officials, but rather I think it would have to come from media reports. I think that it would have to come from more international organizations. It would have to really embarrass the U.S. essentially, and we haven't seen that
Sure.
yet.
Right.
I think the U.S. is very good at emphasizing what it gets out of the relationship and why that's important.
Sana, with your permission, I
Absolutely.
want to go to Ambassador Jamil. Ambassador Saab, I understand that we are talking about foreign policy, we are talking about approach of a country towards another, and usually all of these things are in public domain. These are quite visible to assess. But there seems to be something else that is going on. India calls itself also a mecca of spirituality. India's theosophist movements have influenced secret societies all over the world. And then when you see people like Savitri Devi, who actually traveled from Europe, came to India, influenced not only Hinduism, but also interjected or injected Nazism or its seeds into Hindu movement as well. Do you think that there might be some kind of influence or something eerie going on between the secret societies of these countries, and that's why they are convinced that they have to work together?
There are indicators, as a matter of fact, and if we connect the dots, we can reach to a conclusion that how these secret underground societies and secret elements operating underground, how they are collaborating each other. And there seems to be a collaboration once it comes to supporting such ideology of the BJP government. In fact, RSS propelled ideology. So there are common grounds under which people are operating, and they are conducting the operations. And if we apply our mind and see why the world is not moved at all with so much of human rights violation, including the atrocities against minorities and Muslims. So it has already been explained by our other guests, but basically we have to see it in a bigger perspective, in a bigger context. Now, if we bring into the actual interest of the United States and its allies, it's a huge, because it's not a secret that all the presidents, including Trump and President Joe Biden, both of them, they have reiterated their containment policy as a topmost foreign policy of the United States. So the containment can only be possible if they make countries strong who could be giving some resistance to China's growth. And India is one of them. And once that comes, then the human rights and then the principles of democracy, it is left behind. Then the interest comes and takes the prime position, and that's what is happening. The biggest democracy so far, as it is claimed, the two countries, United States, and of course it's one of the biggest, rather the propellant of the democracy. They are just keeping quiet on so much of undemocratic activities and operations of India. And I would refer here the commission's report, the Human Rights Commission reports, not one, two commission reports. And one of the commission reports, once it was presented to the press for the international consumption and for the United Nations, it was being presented by the commissioner of the human rights with his tears rolling down. And it contains all what we are discussing here at this platform, or it contains all what has discussed and what has been written all over the world in regard to the human rights, but nothing has happened, right?
Right.
Dr. Jamil Saab, we have talked about obviously the Western countries and especially US stance on it. What about the Muslim world stance? If we look at the current situation, of course, Muslims are the main target of Hindutva ideology, and knowing the fact that three of the prominent Muslim countries, Iran, Pakistan and Bangladesh, they are encircled around India, and what kind of impact we would be seeing in coming future if all of these atrocities are increasing day by day. And one more very important thing, that the Gulf countries, their relations with India in recent times, gradually they have increased. Especially if we talk about Iran is constantly selling 425,000 barrels a day crude oil to India, and of course that is a daily routine for them. Nothing has deterred them to do that. Should we be expecting from the Muslim world to speak up against whatever the atrocities are being committed against Muslims in India?
Not in the foreseeable future. See what has the Muslim world or Muslim countries done for Palestine. See what they have done for the Kashmir. See the sanction on Iran and Iran selling oil to India. See the sanction on Russia and Russia selling oil to India. And that further proves the point, the argument which we are making here, that it's the interest of the countries, and the strategic interest becomes the most important interest. And therefore, whether it's the Gulf countries or the countries, US and its allies, then in that case, probably we don't see it in the foreseeable future. So far as the Gulf countries concerned, people, the OIC members, and the OIC by itself, their Charter Article 9 and Article 10, if they invoke that, ask for the head of the state summit, and make some resolution. This is the second biggest regional organization. This is the second biggest organization after the UN. And that definitely can have its impact, 57 countries.
True.
If nothing else, if they boycott,
right. And Dr. Jamil, I understand that, of course, and every time when we discuss this, these are of course the concerns that are presented.
Absolutely.
But it seems at the end of the day, when we look at any sort of possible scenario or any organization or body or countries, we always come to the same conclusion. And if not the courts or the legal situation or bodies such as the UN or the OIC or countries with their own economic interests, then where do we actually look for a possible solution? Tom, when we talk about not just in India, but perhaps human rights violations anywhere in the world, what really is the route to be able to come to a tangible solution to relieve people of their suffering? Or is it just arbitrary?
It's difficult because I mean there isn't a strong precedent out there for countries wanting to intervene in the domestic affairs of other countries unless they find it to be in their interest in terms of foreign policy. Any interventions that have happened in the world have always been predicated, even if in rhetoric on human rights. And the truth is they've been predicated actually as being in the interest of that country, whether it was overthrowing a government, whether it was just trying to criticize a government, highlighting human rights abuses. I mean, we look at what the U.S. is doing with China on the Xinjiang issue, and it's something. And obviously, this is something that is tied very much to the U.S.-China dispute that's going on right now. It's the reason also why you don't see the U.S. speak much about what's going on in Israel, for example, where we've seen growing violence in recent days, and also demolitions of homes as well. A strategy also rooted in colonialism there. This is something that we have to keep in mind, that the U.S. has selectively chosen who it's going to criticize. And of course, you could extrapolate that to just about any other country in the world. And when it comes to international organizations, it gets even more difficult because now you have multiple countries' interests to take into account. And of course, they don't want that. The international organizations will always skew on the side, I think, of not criticizing or singling one country out.
Right. We have to move on to our second segment, but Farrukh, you wanted to add something before we
Right.
do that.
I just very quickly wanted to remind everybody that tolerating bad or regressive cultures is a two-way street, right? Remember that I just used a name, Savitri Devi, and there's a reason why I did so. I didn't come across this name from any Indian source. I came across it when I was visiting a website of a neo-Nazi who has written Turner Diaries, right? William Pierce. His website actually has this, and since there has been rise of a Hindutva government in India, there has been a direct correspondence in the West as well of white nationalists, because Brahmins and then Nazi myth, they connect and they say that there can be a Nazi world order. So I think as a citizen of the world who has concerns about West security as well, I think everybody who is in the West should actually look up Savitri Devi and see how this might be an osmosis that is going on.
Absolutely. We'll move on to now the statement that has come from the U.S. State Department with reference to the U.S.'s relationship with Pakistan. And Tom, I'm going to start with you. When we look at what has unfolded and in the recent months in Pakistan, of course, there's a lot of talk by the previous government and the former Prime Minister with reference to a conspiracy being hatched against Pakistan with the U.S.'s involvement with regards to regime change in the country. And we've seen that our leadership and our army institutions have also come up and have denied that any such conspiracy actually exists. But similarly, we also need to be able to be reassured with the fact that our relationship moving forward with the US is going to be unaffected by this. And the statements are reassuring. But do you really think that this is going to be something which will be able to be a smooth process for both the US and Pakistan to be able to take the relationship forward?
Well, I don't think it'll be smooth, but I think it'll be possible. I think that the conspiracy accusations, I think they really emerge from especially in recent years, a slow breakdown in relations between the U.S. and the Khan administration in Pakistan, especially in relation to Pakistan's closeness to China, to tensions with India. But also, I think that part of the suspicion there is that the U.S. has, of course, always been very close to the Pakistani military institutions, which is really where I think the breakdown came within Pakistan itself between Khan and the military. But when it comes to moving forward now, I think there's very much an opportunity here to sort of reset those relations if the U.S. can understand that doesn't provide much room for the U.S. to act as a wedge between Pakistan and China. So going back to that conversation, if the U.S. is trying to approach this by saying we can get on better terms with Pakistan and therefore counter Chinese influence, I think that will be a very difficult road, because the new Pakistani administration in Sharif has also emphasized the CPC and other initiatives with China. And of course, there is room in Pakistan to be able to deal with both the U.S. and China. But if the U.S. needs to be able to understand that, I think, for it to be able to move forward. And of course, on
Right.
Pakistan's side, they have to understand the U.S. concerns in relation to
Right, and
Afghanistan and
but Tom,
Pakistan's
that perhaps our
security interests.
relationship with China has always been there, and it is quite evident how the relationship has unfolded over decades, irrespective of whoever has been in power in our country. But when we look at perhaps the recent evolving situation, don't you think that the focus of the Biden administration would be more on our relationship moving ahead with Russia and how perhaps the dynamic with the U.S. is going to unfold?
Yeah, of course. This is also a very important element to it. We remember that Prime Minister Khan had been in Russia just as the intervention began, and there were some questions as to whether he was tacitly supporting it or at least neutral on it. And in Pakistan in general has been quite neutral on the issue, though there have been some statements condemning it from certain officials, of course. India, of course, also being neutral on it. I think that the U.S. is also looking at in terms of which countries are on the fence on this issue, and can Pakistan be turned against Russia in that sense? Obviously, they don't have as much of a historical relationship as you mentioned as India and Russia do. So there might be an opportunity there as well. But it's difficult because I think that there are major countries out there that say to themselves, well, if I don't have to get involved, why should I get involved? If I can have some relationship with Russia, perhaps not increase them exponentially right now, but why should I sacrifice them just because of the U.S.? But if a better relationship with the U.S. is at stake, maybe that is the calculus there.
Yeah, Dr. Jamil, you're a seasoned diplomat yourself, sir, and I just wanted to ask you, by the looks of it, of course, the word propaganda is being used by the American side, and they have extended this statement that propaganda against America by one of the political parties of Pakistan, which is PTI, should end now. It seems as if it was not their narrative, but if we talk about Donald Lu, whose statement obviously forced Pakistan to issue a démarche as well, because his statement was very harsh one, and that's why the démarche was given at that time. Can we say that it was highly possible that this certain diplomat, he's been stating his own narratives, and it had nothing to do with US as state, and these kind of diplomats, they need to be cautioned by US not to issue such statements in future, because their statements can actually deteriorate the bilateral relations with important countries?
Well, the point is that this kind of a communication, where we call it a cable and we in our foreign office call it a telegram, this, if it is politicized, and I think it's one of the very rare occasions that Pakistan political party has politicized a foreign ministry matter. Now, these are not very uncommon. It happens in countries' relation from time to time. And if we dig out, there would be more than about a dozen such communication in past, but it did not surface and it was not brought into the public domain. And that's why it has become an issue, a big issue. Yes, the question is that, first of all, the ambassador, how he conceived and how the notes were taken and in which context the American diplomat, Mr. Lu, had said whatever he said. So all those things are to be, and these are the communication which is for the consumption of our foreign office. And if our foreign office feels like they felt that this was detrimental to their sovereignty and integrity, then in that case, they issued a démarche in the matter. Démarche has been issued from time to time to so many countries, but that is not brought normally in public domain the manner it has been. So that is how it is being affected. I have been saying it in more than a dozen programs that this is one of those routine communication which the ambassadors, they write, they go, they meet certain diplomats, they come back, they write and they give their own analysis. The ambassador must have conceived well, and the narration or the
Right.
points.
Dr. Jamil, I understand that, of course, that perhaps this is something that was all too common with reference to the cable and the démarche as well. But the kind of usage that has been done by the PTI and the former Prime Minister even now is perhaps to follow a narrative to also gain popularity with this reference, and that affects the way Pakistani citizens perhaps look at the relationship with the US as well, or the US looks at Pakistan too. That perhaps is a matter of more concern than just whether or not the cable or the démarche is something which is all too common, and a challenge for the new government as well. Do you think that however much is being done with reference to developing this relationship further, and both the leadership also commenting on the importance of this bilateral relationship, how can the people's opinion with reference to the US, the way they perceive the US, particularly in Pakistan, is going to be changed or impacted?
Right, and very quickly, Dr. Jamil, because I think this is almost the end of the segment, very quickly, let me also ask you how normal, you said that this is fairly common. Do you think had this letter or communique not been actually politicized, do you think that there would have been, in your experience, there would be a démarche?
There should have been a démarche or not? This what you're asking?
I'm saying that had this matter not been politicized, we would have seen a démarche or not?
Well, démarche probably is basically because of politicizing this point. Otherwise, that could have been clarified by having a normal communication with the ambassador or charge d'affaires, or head of the mission, acting head of the mission of US in Pakistan, and he would have conveyed and come back and would have clarified. Normally, that is also another path, and normally this is the path which is followed. This démarche was, I think, propelled because of the political reasons and because of capitalizing it for the political purpose.
One last question from Tom. Tom, do you think that in Pakistan, political parties, they need to realize that rather than condemning US as a state or people of US, they should be condemning the foreign policy preferences of certain political parties like Democrats and Republicans? They, of course, have different foreign policy stance towards Pakistan or India or elsewhere.
And Dr. Jamil, I'll come back to you with reference to the public opinion question.
Yes. I think it's difficult for one country to criticize the policies of just one party, especially the United States, given the rapidity which we've seen political pendulum swinging here from Republican to Democrat. So if you target one political party, the risk you run is that the next election cycle they're in power, and now you've tied yourself to one side of the political spectrum here. So I don't know if that's a strategy that we'll see in the future in Pakistan, but I do believe that Pakistan should be targeted in its criticism. And if there is any allegations of interference, or if there's allegations of bias, it should be very much exposed in very certain light, rather than painting a broad picture or painting with a broad
stroke.
All right,
Tom, we're almost out of time. Dr. Jamil, if you could quickly answer that, we'll move on to our next segment. Yes.
That was a very good question. As a matter of fact, this opinion, turning the opinion of the people at large, the people at large, they don't really comprehend the intricacies of the foreign policy, and this would be detrimental to our foreign policy and detrimental to our interest abroad. And a society which was radicalized ever since we had gone into the Afghan war, and now using this particular narration and turning the opinion of the people here would definitely impact. Although Ted Price has said that it's not going to have an effect, but psychologically, it does have an effect on the
I understand that. Thank you very much, Dr. Jamil and Tom, for joining us and being a part of the debate. There's much to talk about, but unfortunately, we're out of time for this segment. We're going to now move on to discuss about the economic situation of the country, and what we've seen again is a bad day for the Pakistan Stock Exchange. We've been joined online by Dr. Waqar Ahmed, who's Executive Director, STPI, to talk more about this and to tell us what really can be done with reference to the economic situation and the measures that the government need to take. And soon, perhaps, because it seems that the uncertainty that currently exists, especially with reference to the IMF program and fuel subsidies, is something which is contributing to our current economic situation. Dr. Bakar, are you with me?
Yes. Thank you.
Right. So, Dr. Bakar, when we look at the situation today, what has happened is that there has been again a dip of 600 points just after we've seen a low of about 1,500 points just 2 days ago. And this is something which obviously is worrisome for the people at large. And then, of course, the economic experts and the government as well, something that the government had criticized the previous government for. But then again, we see that there perhaps is still hesitancy with reference to the fuel subsidies that the IMF program also talks about. Do you think that this is something that we will be seeing a reversal of very soon? Because so far it seems that the government is not sure what it needs to do about that.
Yes, thank you very much. I think you're absolutely right. There is a level of uncertainty which is, of course, affecting the market. And of course, when this happened previously, one of the things that used to give some cushion was effective communications by the Ministry of Finance, which is what they now need to do. I do understand that there's a new administration in office, and of course, they will take time to organize themselves. But the hemorrhage to the market can certainly be at least minimized if proper communications is in place and markets are informed well in time about the kind of the type of negotiations which are going on with the IMF. You would recall that back in 2019, even IMF was very active in delivering that communications, which seems a bit absent right now.
Right. Dr. Saab, I'm glad that you're talking about these matters. One question regarding efficacy of the markets themselves. How pertinent an indicator is Pakistan Stock Exchange when it comes to state of economy? And then I was hoping that if you can comment also on why rupee is continuously weakening now. Dollar stands at somewhere around 191 today.
Yes, thank you, Farrukh Saab. I think this is an important question because stock market is usually a market of secondary financial instruments, but still remains an important barometer of economic confidence. And which is why, of course, it is important to monitor it. But you're absolutely right. The other indicators are also responding to market sentiment. Of course, predominantly the value of the currency, for example. We're also seeing volatility in the bond market, for example, or the forward rates which are being offered for the commodities. All in all, I think that rates in the primary as well as the secondary market, which includes the stock market, they're all looking for some sort of information, some sort of consensus which should come from both IMF office as well as the Ministry of Finance. In case of your later question, which is the value of rupee or the volatility in the value of rupee, I think this is where the central bank needs to come in and really demonstrate that they have put in place functions in line with the new law, which is the independence of the central bank, and the fact that rupee has come to a new low. But this hasn't happened for the first time in these 2 years. Rupee will gain value, for example, once two things are in place. Firstly, a consensus with the IMF, which could take a week, and second, the ongoing diplomatic negotiations with, for example, Saudi Arabia as well as the Chinese government. I think this is the kind of communication which should come out very soon to help rupee recover its value.
Right. And Dr. Bakar, we have also, of course, seen the impact that this has had on investors coming in Pakistan as well. And of course, this is a situation of concern for investors in the country. But even if we were to say that perhaps when we look at a change in policy or action by the current government, we may see a change in what we're witnessing in the economic situation of the country. Does that mean that we will still have perhaps residual effects on investors and their trust in Pakistan?
I think you're absolutely right. Long-term investor has taken a position which is very cautious. You're not seeing long-term investment coming in since the past 2 months. Of course, they would like to see more political stability before they commit to longer-term positions. Currently, most of the flows which you are seeing are of short-term nature, not even of medium-term nature. By short-term, we mean less than 12 months. So yes, immediate political stability is still, of course, far as regards the perceptions of investors.
Yeah, Dr. Waqar, if we look at the previous IMF program we are going through, are we expected by any chance by the IMF program to put extra taxes in coming December? And I'm being told that 400 billion rupees of the extra taxes we are expected by the IMF to put on, increase the taxes?
Yes, you're right. So there will be an increase in taxes. Of course, that is how, of course, the fund designs the program so that higher levels of government expenditure, which are already expected this year, can be funded through tax and non-tax sources. But within the tax component, I think IMF is cognizant of the fact that they would like to have a design which puts lesser burden on the poorer population. So I think currently the negotiations are that if, for example, the government raises taxes on, for example, commodities which are in less intensive use by poor, that could sort of have lesser regressive impact. They've also indicated that there could be higher levels of corporate taxes, particularly on, for example, profit slabs which are above a certain threshold point. FBR has already demonstrated in this quarter that they can achieve higher levels of taxes given the increasing commodity prices globally. So there have been more than anticipated tax revenue gains given that oil prices were high this year.
Right. Dr. Saab, given that we are expected to raise, do away with subsidies as well, and that is also a demand that consistently comes back, and then you also raise the issue of taxes. Now, my question is about optics. How can a political government that comes in so late in the term and then so close to the elections can be expected to make such humongous, and potentially unpopular decisions, sir?
Yes, I think, Farrukh Saab, currently what they are negotiating is that the subsidies or the set of subsidies which was given by the previous government of PTI, at least those should be allowed for another quarter. And then gradually from the next quarter, those subsidies should be faded. And I think this is something which they will really need to persuade with the fund, because I do understand that fund's position is currently what you are saying. They would like an immediate reversal of subsidies.
Right. How optimistic are you regarding the negotiations that start on 18th?
I think I'm optimistic, given that fund usually takes a sympathetic position when a government is new. It is only once, of course, the government has understood the macroeconomic fundamentals and, of course, assumed total responsibility that fund would expect a sort of a front loading of the program. So I'm expecting that maybe the government would clear at least this current review and the next one. But after that, I think the government would need, at least after August or September, the government would need to demonstrate greater fiscal discipline to the fund.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Waqar Ahmed, for joining us and being a part of the debate. Thank you, everyone, for watching the show. Of course, there's much still to be talked about, and we have so much that remains still to be seen, but there is urgent action required, both in terms of our economic situation and the violations that exist the world over, and we hope to see changes soon. Thank you very much for watching the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.